You're listening to the Co-Creator Network. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Hey, everybody. This is Maxine Taylor with another edition of Move into the Magic. And I am so thrilled to be able to tell you that my guest today is someone, those of you who are familiar with exopolitics, know. You've read his books, you've attended his workshops, you've seen him on TV, you've heard him on radio. Dr. Michael Salla is a pioneer in the development of exopolitics, which, and I didn't know this till about, a couple of years ago. Exopolitics is the study of the political implications of extraterrestrial life. So now you know why he's my guest on my show, those of you who listen regularly. Michael is the author of 4 exopolitics books, including Galactic Diplomacy, Getting to Yes with E.T. Dr. Salla was an assistant professor and researcher in residence in the School of International Service at the American University from 1996 to 2004. He's got a Ph.D. in government from the University of Queensland, Australia. Over 400 articles revealing his exopolitics research are available for free on his website, and I'm going to give that to you right now because we may not have time later to go over this again. His website is exopolitics.org, and I will spell that. exopolitics.org. And the reason I'm spelling it, some of you are saying, why are you bothering to spell it? Because for some people, this is a new topic. Dr. Salla founded the Exopolitics Institute in 2005 and the Exopolitics Journal in 2006. He has co-organized 4 international conferences on extraterrestrial life and Earth transformation on the Big Island of Hawaii. He's appeared on hundreds of radio and TV shows and at international conferences, and he's spoken on his research on exopolitics and international conflict. Dr. Michael Salla, welcome to Move Into the Magic.
Thank you, Maxine, for that wonderful introduction.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You have so much to share with us, and you have so many books that you have written as well, and I'd love you, if you feel so led, to touch on them. Of course, you have the most recent book. I'm sure you'd like to talk about that. But please, will you start? And the truth is, jump in anywhere you would like. But I have heard of exoplanets. So what is the link between exoplanets and the scientific interest in exodiplomacy?
Well, that's really been an exciting development, Maxine, over the last few years, because scientists only in the last few years with the discovery of exoplanets have now been openly discussing what happens when extraterrestrial life is discovered. Prior to the discovery of exoplanets, as strange as it may seem, scientists thought that discussion of extraterrestrial life was all speculation and premature because there was no scientific data indicating that extraterrestrial life existed anywhere at all. But with the discovery of exoplanets and the fact that many of these exoplanets have been discovered to be in the habitable regions of their suns or capable of hosting life in various forms, now scientists have begun talking about, extraterrestrial life is certainly going to be found eventually. So what is going to happen when we find out that there's intelligent life out there? Are we prepared for that? What policies will we have in place? Is it good to kind of advertise our position in the galaxy or in the solar system to extraterrestrials in other solar systems? So these are the sort of questions that scientists are now asking, whereas only a few years ago, Maxine, they weren't interested at all. And that is great, because it means now that the field of exodiplomacy is becoming something that scientists are interested in, because it's no longer a question of if extraterrestrial life exists out there. It's now a question of when will we discover it. And so that then leads to the obvious question, well, what do we do when we discover it? And that's where exodiplomacy comes in.
Oh, and that question is huge. What do we do? I mean, I'm jumping right into the deep end of the pond right here. What do we do when we discover it? And many people have. How do we proceed? I know you have so much to share, but what does happen when extraterrestrial life is discovered, or official contact? Let's just call it that. Official contact occurs.
Well, as far as those scientists involved in the research of exoplanets, or those involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, those groups of scientists are basically leading a very conventional approach to discovering extraterrestrial life. One, through astronomical data that has been acquired through various scientific instruments, a couple of telescopes, various Earth-based telescopes around the planet, and so forth, basically leading to the discovery and confirmation of more exoplanets. And eventually, with upgrades in these technologies, they hope to be able to discern biosignatures in exoplanets, and that would be confirmation that there's life in other planets, in other parts of the galaxy. So, for example, if they found high levels of oxygen and ozone in the atmosphere of a distant exoplanet, that for them would be an unmistakable sign that there is life on that planet, because it's only through photosynthesis that oxygen is generated in sufficient quantities to be able to generate ozone layers. And so that's one approach. And the other approach is the SETI approach, which is looking at various radio signals that are being monitored from different parts of the galaxy, and hoping to discover extraterrestrial life which is communicating or sending out radio signals, just as we in our technological development began to communicate using radio signals kind of in the early 20th century. The SETI scientists believe that other civilizations, if they exist elsewhere, would also probably be using radio waves for communication purposes, and there's no reason why we couldn't detect that with the sufficient resources to kind of monitor the frequencies. So those are the two ways in which the conventional scientists are approaching the whole question of, well, is there life out there? And of course, the big one is, well, what happens when we discover it? With the SETI Institute, they have gone furthest than any other scientific organization in setting up a set of protocols for the once an extraterrestrial intelligence has been detected. And that's a kind of set of protocols whereby, the scientists first of all share the data, confirm that in fact the data is correct, that this has come from an extraterrestrial source, and then there are various steps taken in terms of notifying various scientific organizations, and then the United Nations and so forth. Yes.
I'm thinking very practically. I approach everything, from a very workable, very usable approach, and I'm thinking, okay, that's the first step, which is very exciting. The first time it is validated, we're going to be so excited. I'm thinking in terms of being to being contact. Am I jumping too far ahead, Michael, with that approach?
Well, certainly not. I mean, I think that's kind of like on everyone's mind. What happens when we as individuals have that face-to-face meeting with extraterrestrials? Well, then. In discussing that, we're going from the realm of kind of more the scientific approach, which is very incremental and looking at various ways in which extraterrestrial intelligence is detected, to something which for many scientists is kind of like not accepted scientific data, which is the contactee information, whereby there have been individuals who have come forward and said that they have had face-to-face meetings with extraterrestrials. And so that kind of like raises this question of, well, what do we do with the stories of people who say that they are having contact now? Let's accept that. Okay, the scientists are saying that extraterrestrials probably exist somewhere out there in the distant parts of the galaxy, and eventually we're going to discover them, through various scientific astronomical equipment and telescopes, or through monitoring radio waves. That this is an inevitable discovery at some point in the future. But what do we do with that data, which says, well, they're visiting us in the here and the now? And of course, that brings up a really incredible database, incredible set of information of people who have been saying that they are having meetings in the here and the now. And this goes right back to the 1950s, during the famous Contactee movement, when there were a number of very prominent people in the United States who actually came forward to say that they were having contact. But they have inspired generations with their stories, and these are still very inspirational stories of people saying that they have had direct face-to-face contact. It has kind of morphed over the years, or it has changed from the kind of friendly meetings with the Space Brothers that were the kind of focus of reports in the 1950s and 60s, to the more recent reports of abductions, which is a lot more enigmatic and kind of like a little scary for a lot of people. Abductions versus the voluntary contact. So I think that there's a lot of reason to accept that both have been happening. But of course, this is not something that scientists would accept, but certainly something that there's a lot of data, a lot of witnesses who've come forward and put their credibility on the line, or have had witnesses, or have photographs, or have other physical evidence supporting their claims. So I think there's good reason why we need to look at that information as well. People who have had stories of face-to-face meetings with extraterrestrials in the now, and we need to kind of look at that and explore, well, what does this mean for us as private individuals? Does this mean that extraterrestrials are seeking us out? Do we kind of like seek them out? And why isn't the government telling us about it?
Well, I mean, that right there, your last part of the question, we could go on for days on that. So let's do. Let's talk about that, because so many people have stepped forward, people with great credibility. And in fact, you are, I'm sure, friends with many of the people involved in this disclosure movement. The government has denied it in the face of testimonies and even evidence from people who are incredibly worthy of trust. Where do you see that fitting in? Talk about that just a little bit, because I know that it's all surfacing now. It's all coming to a head. It's, as we said, it's not if we make contact, but when we make contact. And it's people like you who are preparing us for that contact. So can you talk a little bit about how do we proceed? How does our government proceed? What happens to our society when it becomes known that, yes, when we have reached the point as human beings where we can welcome them, when we quit killing each other and reach the point where we can welcome the extraterrestrial, take it from there.
I believe that what has happened has been that there has been a secrecy policy. That's the kind of conclusion that one reaches after reading all of these accounts, all of these testimonies that go way back into the 1940s. Various whistleblowers, very credible people who have seen things, experienced things, some of these things in the course of their official duties. And this has been steadily released to the public. And the conclusion that basically I've reached is that the government has been deeply divided over this from the very beginning. There has been a faction of the government, probably the stronger faction, which was basically keep this all secret until we know how to break this to the American public, and so that we could get prepared sufficiently so that we could deal with extraterrestrials openly appearing over the Earth. So there has been a secrecy policy that has been favored by various factions, and this is for many reasons that they would consider to be kind of good reasons. The political, the military, the social, the religious, all of these things kind of come to bear. Like these beings come from other worlds with superior technologies. Could the military really admit to the American public that beings from other worlds are here with superior technologies, and if they ever decide to become nasty, there's not a thing we can do about it? Or what would happen to the dominant industries and the economies of the planet if all of a sudden the fossil fuel industry, the oil industry, gas industry, pharmaceutical industries, all of these things were made redundant by the advanced energy or the advanced kind of medical knowledge of extraterrestrial visitors? The economic and the social impact would be enormous. And what about the religious as well? What happens if all of a sudden these extraterrestrials say that, well, we actually biologically engineered humanity over the course of many thousands of years? I mean, what would that do for religious systems, various religious faiths where people believe that there's this omnipotent God that created Earth in 7 days, or created the universe in 7 days, and all of a sudden we find out that extraterrestrials bioengineered humanity and basically seeded us here? Well, what happens to religion then? So there has always been these factors, all of these reasons cited by those that want to maintain the secrecy. But on the other hand, there's also been a kind of pro-disclosure faction as well, which is very significant. These are people within the military, within the political elites who do want to disclose, that want the truth to come out, that think that people have a right to know, and also think that humanity can adjust, that we're not going to kind of like collapse with the enormity of the discovery of extraterrestrial life. And so there have been those that think that this information should be released. And so I think what has happened, Maxine, over the course of the decades has been that we've kind of had almost like a schizophrenic approach taken by government, whereby on the one hand they say no, but on the other hand documents are released, officials say things that kind of like point to this cover-up happening and that there is extraterrestrials out there. And so you kind of have almost like this, best way of phrasing it or describing it is like plausible deniability. It's like you have the information released so that the public can get access to it if they want and learn about extraterrestrial life visiting our world. But on the other hand, the government can turn around and say, well, this is all nonsense, none of it is real, and these people are just faking it.
And that seems very plausible to me, the way they're going to go. I'm envisioning as you're talking, because again, it's not when, in my opinion, it's if. Excuse me, it's not if. I got it backwards. It's when. So we have the global society based on fossil fuel, based on war, based on armaments, based on all kinds of things that the people involved want to hang on to. Do you think our global society will flourish or will disintegrate? Where do you see our I'm asking you to take a quantum leap forward, but with your knowledge and experience, I'm dying to know, how do you see the world community functioning once this advanced technology and information is available to us?
Well, that's a great question, Maxine. And actually there is a very clear answer to that. There actually have been surveys conducted, and one survey was conducted by the National Geographic about a half a dozen years ago. And they asked, well, if extraterrestrial life was discovered, would you be optimistic for the future? Would you be pessimistic and fearful? Or would you kind of like not know which way to go? And basically, out of the total number of respondents to that question, a total of 78% said that they would be optimistic for the future. So that immediately tells us that the vast majority of people, almost 4 out of 5 people, would embrace the challenges of the discovery of extraterrestrial life and contact with extraterrestrials, that most people would embrace that. And interestingly, the survey said that there would be 5% of people who would be fearful and would basically reject this information. And so that tells us that, yes, certainly there would be 5% of the population who would be genuinely shocked, and their worldview would be severely challenged by this. But we've got to keep in mind, Maxine, that that's only 5%. That's 1 in 20 people whose lives would basically be turned upside down because of this discovery, and the rest of the survey respondents were kind of like in the middle. So we know that most people, the vast majority of people, would be able to easily handle the discovery of extraterrestrial life, and that only a small minority would be really severely challenged by this. And I think we could kind of like generally say that the younger generation would be the ones that would be most easily able to embrace this new reality, and the older generation would be the ones that would be most challenged by it. And as the years go by, I think we are really getting to that place where there could be an official announcement tomorrow. And I think most people on the planet would be ready to embrace this, that there wouldn't be widespread societal disruption, there wouldn't be riots in the streets, we wouldn't get people all of a sudden really taking extreme actions because of such an announcement. I think most people would just take it in stride and say, okay, well, this is fantastic, new possibilities here, and how's this going to help me?
Well, gosh, I can only hope that that is the way it would be, because I certainly would open my door and welcome our galactic brethren. To me, that would be so exciting, because it really would transform everything about our life as we know it. And I think the people who would be threatened would be the oil companies, the armaments manufacturers, the people who would be losing money. I think it boils down to money. That's my opinion. Because of the advanced technology that the extraterrestrials would bring to our entire planet. Not just, one country, our entire planet. So I can see there being factions. I really can. I can see great propaganda against the extraterrestrials. But the most simple question: how would the world conduct diplomatic relationships with extraterrestrial life? In other words, who represents Earth in diplomatic negotiations with ETs?
Well, again, that's a really good question. Who does represent the Earth? And, as we know, we have some major nations on the planet that don't really like ceding authority to global institutions like the United Nations. But nevertheless, that would seem to be the most logical choice, that the United Nations would take a leading role in representing the Earth in terms of diplomatic relations with extraterrestrials. And there actually is an organization within the United Nations system, which is called the Office of Outer Space Affairs. It was created through a treaty that was signed in the 1960s concerning outer space. And the Office for Outer Space Affairs basically deals with all matters pertaining to outer space. And so if you have extraterrestrials showing up, there is a chairman of the Office of Outer Space Affairs who presumably would play a leading role in coordinating a United Nations response to extraterrestrial life visiting the Earth. So that would be kind of like the officially, I think that's the sort of thing that we would probably see in the newspapers, in the New York Times, the Washington Post. If all of a sudden extraterrestrials showed up, it would be like, well, who's going to meet them? I think you would probably find the United Nations kind of like playing a leading role. But of course, that's what it would be happening in plain sight. That's what we would be seeing. But secretly, behind the scenes, there has been diplomatic relations that have been conducted for decades now with visiting extraterrestrials. We talked a little bit earlier about extraterrestrials having direct face-to-face meetings with private individuals and governments suppressing this, covering all this information up. Well, another aspect of the cover-up has been direct diplomatic relations, that is exodiplomacy, or galactic diplomacy, whichever term you prefer, with extraterrestrial visitors. And that has happened secretly. That has happened behind the scenes, involving the major nations of the Earth. And here we're talking principally of United States, Russia, Great Britain, and France. And you ask yourself, well, why those four countries? Why did those four countries play the critical role in basically setting up a system for meeting with extraterrestrials? Well, those were the four victorious nations during the Second World War. Later on, China was admitted, but that kind of came much later. But nevertheless, there has been diplomatic relations between extraterrestrial visitors and representatives from these four major nations. But the United States and Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was known up until 1989, 1990, they were by far the most important nations in dealing with diplomatic relations. So diplomacy has been happening behind the scenes at an official level and also at an unofficial level. Those meetings, those face-to-face meetings that I was saying earlier that were happening with private individuals, they were diplomatic meetings. I mean, basically you had extraterrestrials meeting with private citizens and passing on information about things that needed to be shared with the planet in terms of extraterrestrials visiting us, in terms of the governments hiding this and suppressing this information. Yes. So there has been various levels of diplomacy that have been happening over the years.
Is that what is meant by track 1 and track 2 diplomacy? Would you explain that a little? Am I off on that? What's the difference between the two of them?
Well, that's exactly right, Maxine. Track 1 is official diplomacy. That's what I talked about, either in terms of what would happen if extraterrestrials showed up tomorrow, and it would be the United Nations, most likely, that would play the leading role in coordinating an international response, or what has been happening secretly behind the scenes, where you actually have the major nations, that is the United States and Russia and so forth, secretly conducting official negotiations with extraterrestrial visitors and reaching agreements with them. So that is track 1 diplomacy. Track 2 diplomacy is citizen diplomacy. That is when you have private citizens such as you and I and many of your listeners who would, for whatever reason, find themselves in a situation where they are talking with extraterrestrial visitors or conducting face-to-face meetings with extraterrestrials. So that would be track 2 diplomacy.
How fascinating. How fascinating. This whole field is so thrilling because it is imminent. I mean, yes, people have been contacted, but once it actually is common knowledge, Oh, boy. Which is why for years I have said, quit asking the government to acknowledge that they have been contacted. Let's just proceed under the assumption, with the knowledge, yes, they have been contacted. Now, how do we integrate with them? How do we welcome them? And my question to you is, look at our warring planet. Do you think that we are ready for an overt appearance right now? Or do things have to calm down a little bit, say after a couple of years? And I'm speaking astrologically, when the Uranus-Pluto square is finally over and we've been through all the upheaval. What is your feeling on that?
Well, that's an excellent question, Maxine. I think what is happening is that really, when we look at our planet, at the Earth, it's like there's really two things that are happening. One is that you actually have a kind of an increasingly integrated global society whereby most citizens, basically the dominant things in their lives concern economic affairs and basically living in a way whereby they are integrating new technologies and they live in peace and society and prosperity, or at least they have a middle-class income. So most of the planet, and the exact figure, we're probably talking maybe 80% or something like that, are experiencing a kind of a stability, or what a very famous peace researcher by the name of Kenneth Boulding referred to as stable peace, whereby you can leave your front door, you could drive down to your workplace, and you could spend a day at work, and then you can go off to the shops and buy some things, and then you can come back home and go see a movie or something with your kids and family and so forth. The things are pretty stable, and you have a certain amount of income to be able to sustain yourself in doing basic things. Most people on the planet are experiencing that, and I think that is the kind of situation that most people face. But then you have another world, kind of like a world of struggle and poverty and kind of like extremism, and we are seeing that unfortunately in big parts of the Middle East, where there is this extremism which is running rampant. We see it also in parts of Africa. Again, the same thing. And essentially, these are places where private citizens live in great fear and live in really uncertain circumstances. And so these places are probably places that are not really ready for this kind of information yet, because there's a dominance of, say, more traditional religious perspectives, where there is extreme hostility to outsiders, and a lot of kind of very strict conservative values that are imposed, especially upon women. That's always a good rule of thumb. Look at the way women are treated, and that'll tell you a lot about whether or not that society is ready for this kind of contact. Generally, societies where women are treated with integrity and equality, those places are ready for contact, in my view. But those places where women are not treated in that way, they are places where really contact might take a long time to happen.
Oh, I agree with you. 100%. Wow. I'm so excited to be talking with you today, because this is the kind of conversation I love to have. A good bit of it on my part is speculation, because I don't have the background that you do, but I'm so thrilled that you're sharing all this information with me and, of course, our listeners. Now, I want to shift gears just for a second here, and I'm going to ask you to talk about something I don't know anything about. There is, from what I have learned, a friendship case from Italy, and I'd love you to explain that and tell us about the way the government secretly operate in monitoring and negotiating with the extraterrestrials among us?
Well, that's a really good case, Maxine, and most people don't know about it because it actually occurred in Italy. From the years 1956 up until 1978, there was a case called the friendship case. In Italian, it's called amicizia. That just means friendship. And this involved a group of extraterrestrials who had established a base in the kind of northeast of Italy, and these were underground bases, and they were meeting with private citizens and also interacting with senior level officials within the Italian government and within various NATO countries as well. And this was an important case because it's been so well documented. There were over 100 people that had meetings with these extraterrestrials. And we're not talking about just any person. We're talking about people who were generals, who were very senior officials in the diplomatic community. These were people meeting with these extraterrestrials privately, off the record. And there were photographs taken. There were lots of trade that was happening between the extraterrestrials and the private citizens in Italy. And this was all done with the tacit approval of the Italian government and with NATO. Italy has always been a very important part of NATO. And so from 1956 to 1978, these civilians met with these extraterrestrials repeatedly, where many different senior officials was also able to meet with the extraterrestrials. And some of these extraterrestrials were very tall. We're talking like 8-9 feet tall. And they operated in areas where most private citizens wouldn't be able to easily find them, but they were also found in some of the big cities of Italy as well, that they could also integrate with the Italian society pretty easily, other than the fact that they were pretty tall. So they looked very much like us. And the interesting thing about this, Maxine, was that this went on for just over 22 years. There was no sign that the Italian government or the military or the police or NATO ever attacked these extraterrestrials or ever tried to basically apprehend or incarcerate any individuals that were having these contacts. All they did was basically monitor them. They just wanted to know, what did these extraterrestrials know, what were they doing, and how could this maybe help our technology programs. So these were the sort of things that were really happening behind the scenes. So it shows you, it's just one more case that shows you that there has been diplomatic relations that have been going on secretly behind the scenes involving major governments and major alliances like NATO. And so that is very important to keep in mind here, Maxine.
Can you hear me okay, Michael?
Oops, I can hear you okay now, yes?
Okay, yes, I lost you there for a moment. Well, why did they come here? Was that revealed? What was their purpose in coming here?
Well, the main purpose was to basically educate humanity that we are not alone, and that extraterrestrials are here, and that they want us to learn about them, that there is some kind of historic connection between us and them. And this kind of leads to the question of genetic engineering or some kind of biological sharing of genetics that has happened over the millennia. Essentially, as far as I can tell, there has been a millennia-old program of sharing of genetics between extraterrestrial visitors and humanity. And now there have been those that think that this has been why humanity has progressed so rapidly in terms of civilization. And when we look at certain civilizations, and see how rapidly they developed, it's quite tempting to say that they developed quickly because of some kind of extraterrestrial intervention. The best case for that is the Sumerian civilization, which all of a sudden kind of like just appeared out of nowhere around 3800 BC. And prior to that, the Sumerians were, there wasn't really anything that was particularly distinguishable about their society. But around 3800 BC, it's almost like you had this civilization just appear overnight. And certainly the same thing with Egypt a little bit later. Almost like, well, how did these civilizations just kind of come out of nowhere with such sophisticated knowledge and technologies? And what we learn through reading various historical texts is that they had interactions with extraterrestrial visitors who basically helped them evolve to a high level of society. So I think when we look at cases like the friendship case, we probably have a repeat of something that has happened again and again over human history, whereby for whatever reason, extraterrestrials have decided to appear and to help humanity evolve in a way where hopefully we don't self-destruct. And it's interesting that the extraterrestrials appeared in the atomic age when there was this real threat of atomic annihilation. So maybe this was a big part of their appearance, that they wanted to help us or steer us through this very dangerous time in our history, whereby it would only have taken just a tragic mistake and we could have had a thermonuclear war between the superpowers that would have basically made the whole surface of the planet uninhabitable.
Oh, gosh, yes. Yes, yes. Wow, I'm going to read up on this friendship case, because that to me is totally new to me and very exciting. And your books are very exciting to me. Your most, now correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm reading your bio correctly, the book that you wrote last year in 2013, Kennedy's Last Stand, Eisenhower UFOs, MJ-12, and JFK's assassination, that really caught my eye. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, President Kennedy was someone that was very familiar with the UFO issue, and it really came from his wartime service during the time when he was actually he worked at Navy intelligence, and also when he became close friends with the Secretary of the Navy, who later became the Secretary of Defense, which was James Forrestal. And so Kennedy, as a young man, was introduced to the information concerning UFOs and extraterrestrial life in the 1940s. And that, for a lot of people, comes as a shock, because when they think of President Kennedy, most people just assume that, well, anything of note, anything that's significant that happened with President Kennedy kind of pretty much happened either during the time when he served as a senator or maybe when he served as a congressman. And before that, nothing really major or anything of importance happened with President Kennedy. Well, in my research, I found that, in fact, some really major things happened during Kennedy's youth, or during the time when he was in his 20s and he was meeting with these very senior people who were involved with the UFO extraterrestrial issue at its very beginning. And Secretary Forrestal was actually a very close friend of the Kennedy family, and actually wanted to recruit Kennedy to his staff. So anyway, basically what happened was that Kennedy learned about the UFO issue back in the 40s, and then when he became president in 1961, Kennedy naturally assumed, well, now I'm president of the United States. I want to know what has happened in the 15 years or so since I first learned about this UFO issue and what's going on now. So, I mean, it's only a natural thing. But he was told no. He was told, Mr. President, you don't have a need to know. Well, Kennedy, thankfully, was not the type of man who would accept that kind of response by someone who was his subordinate. So Kennedy did all in his power to try to get to the bottom of the UFO issue, because the thing was, he knew it was real. Because when he was in his 20s, learned about the issue from very senior US officials. So he knew that there was stuff going on. And he wasn't going to accept some CIA official telling him that there's things happening, but they of no interest to the office of the president. So he wanted to get to the bottom of it. And so there was a major power struggle happening behind the scenes. And basically there was a tragic outcome to that, which we know of as the assassination of President Kennedy. And in the book, I lay out all of the facts, all of the documents, and the chronology of what President Kennedy did to try to get to the bottom of the UFO issue, to try and regain authority on behalf of the American people and on behalf of the office of the president over this issue, which had been taken over by a kind of unrepresentative clique of elites that thought that this was information and technologies that belonged to them now, and that even an American president didn't have a need to know when it came to this issue.
Oh, that's amazing. For those of you who would like a copy of this book, let me repeat the title. It's Kennedy's Last Stand: Eisenhower, UFOs, MJ-12, and JFK's Assassination. Is it available on Amazon, Michael?
Indeed it is. It's available basically at any bookstore. You can just go in, and if they don't have it in there, you can just order it. Or, of course, Amazon. And with Kindle these days, you can get the electronic copy as well. So certainly there are many different ways to get it. But, yes, Amazon is a good place to start.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now I want to talk about something even more recent. And I want to turn you loose on this one. I would love you to talk about the Star Visitor Sanctuary, which was approved by the reinstated Kingdom of Hawaii. First of all, please explain the reinstated Kingdom of Hawaii, and then go into the Star Visitor Sanctuary.
Sure, Maxine. Well, most people assume that Hawaii is a state of the U.S., and that is something that is not accepted by a significant number of Hawaiians who historically are able to refer to the illegal annexation of the Hawaiian Islands by the U.S. And there is good historical information supporting that fact, or that process whereby Hawaii was illegally annexed by the US. And in fact, no less than President Clinton, and also a joint resolution of the US Congress in 1991, I believe it was, or 93, I think. Yes, 93. Basically, there was a joint resolution of Congress signed by the president apologizing for the illegal annexation of the Hawaiian Islands by the US. And of course, it called for a reconciliation process, and it apologized. Well, for many Hawaiians who were really kind of innocent of all of this, they realized that this was a really tragic event, that the Kingdom of Hawaii had been illegally overthrown and taken over and annexed by the US. So they decided to basically begin a political process for the reinstatement of the Kingdom of Hawaii. So that process began in 1999 with a political process whereby a reconvened legislature was appointed, and then elections were held for a parliament, two houses of Congress, or to a bicameral system for the reinstated kingdom, and then a prime minister was elected by the Hawaiian Kingdom Parliament, and various offices were created. And since that time, there have been a total of 4 sets of elections held by the reinstated Kingdom of Hawaii, and they have basically grown in terms of their prominence and the number of people that are involved in the kingdom over the Hawaiian Islands. And so basically what has happened is that the reinstated Kingdom of Hawaii, I live on the big island of Hawaii, and I live in an area called Puna, which is on the kind of southeast coast of Hawaii, of the island. And one of the nobles within the Kingdom of Hawaii was very interested in extraterrestrial contact. And so he contacted me and said, well, we actually are very interested in contact at the Kingdom of Hawaii at its most recent convention in Maui in February of 2014 of this year, passed a resolution basically endorsing an effort to establish relations with extraterrestrial life. So I was approached by one of the nobles within the reinstated Kingdom of Hawaii. He's known as Uncle Robert, and he asked me, what would it take for extraterrestrial contact to happen here in the Hawaiian Islands under the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Hawaii? So I, having lived in the Hawaiian Islands for 9 years, this is my 10th year now, basically said, well, you have a tradition of creating sanctuaries. So why not create a sanctuary for extraterrestrial contact? So that extraterrestrials could come and land in sovereign land that is claimed by the Kingdom of Hawaii, and they could land there, and it wouldn't be under the authority of the United States. This land would be under the authority of the Kingdom of Hawaii, who would then give the star visitors the protection that they need from any kind of external interference. And that's important because, as far as my research has shown, is that whenever there has been an attempt by friendly extraterrestrials to land or to appear over any major population areas, that they have been shot at. That they have been targeted by advanced weapon systems belonging to the secret government, if you like. And so this was a very important fact that really needed to be dealt with. And so with the creation of the Hawaii Star Visitor Sanctuary, what was done was that you basically had a UFO landing pad where any visitors from anywhere in the galaxy could land, and that this would be a sanctuary for them to meet with citizens, private citizens, or government representatives. And it's important to mention here, Maxine, that this is not the first time that this has happened. This is the second time that this has happened in our recent history. The first time was in 1967 in a town called St. Paul in the province of Alberta, Canada, and that actual UFO landing pad was officially opened by the then Secretary of Defense for the Canadian government, Paul Hellyer. And that's very interesting because Paul Hellyer has been very prominent recently in saying that there has been a government cover-up of extraterrestrial life, and he is one of the people that actually has traveled to Hawaii in the past and ratified or was a signatory to a document calling for establishing peaceful relations with extraterrestrial visitors. So it's interesting that Paul Hellyer is connected to Hawaii and also the landing pad that the Canadians established in 1967. So the landing. I'm sorry. Did you ask?
You said it was interesting, and I said very interesting. Yes.
Exactly, and so the landing pad or the Star Visitor Sanctuary here was officially launched in June of June 27 of this year, and the most recent development is that the Kingdom of Hawaii has approved a set of contact protocols. So this is the first time any sovereign entity on the planet, as far as we know, has openly accepted and promoted a set of contact protocols with extraterrestrial visitors. So that's very exciting, because for the first time we have an idea of how a government would react to extraterrestrials showing up. Other governments have kind of like hinted at this. There have been, for example, a Japanese minister, I believe he was the Minister for Defense a few years ago, basically said, well, why doesn't Japan develop a policy for contact with extraterrestrials? But nothing was ever done, but he proposed it. And as I said, even though the SETI has developed a set of protocols for the discovery of extraterrestrial life through radio signals, there has been no set of protocols established for contact with extraterrestrials. So there's a big difference, Maxine, between contact with extraterrestrials and the discovery of extraterrestrial life. Of course, the discovery of extraterrestrial life might be something that happens through the detection of oxygen levels in some distant exoplanet in another part of the galaxy, or through the detection of radio signals coming from another part of the galaxy. So that would be a discovery of extraterrestrial life, and there's a protocol for how to deal with that, and we talked about that earlier. But there has been no set of protocols established for contact with extraterrestrials. And so this is something that now the Kingdom of Hawaii has accepted, and very shortly this will be actually publicized, and then you will have, for the very first time, a sovereign entity establishing an explicit set of contact protocols with extraterrestrial visitors, and this will be the first time. And I think there will be many other countries that will follow suit with their own protocols for what happens when extraterrestrials are discovered.
Oh, that's very, very exciting. Are these protocols available on your website?
Not yet, Maxine. We even though the protocols have been approved by the Kingdom of Hawaii, they are still going through a process in terms of the official ratification and signatures and so forth. So that's a bit of a process. But in the next week or two, we expect that to be finalized, and then they will be made public, and people can go to my website and they'll get the information there. Or they could just go to the website for the Hawaii Star Visitor Sanctuary, which is just HawaiiStarVisitorSanctuary.org, and they'll find the information there with a lot of background as well.
Fascinating and exciting. This is a very exciting time to be alive, and I am so grateful that you were able to make time to be my guest on Move Into the Magic. What you've shared with us is thrilling, and I thank you so much and wish you continued success with your work. And I hope you'll come back. I hope you'll be my guest again, because I know you're going to be having you'll have more information to share with us. And once again, people, if you would like to contact Dr. Michael Salla, it's very, very simple. His website is exopolitics.org. Michael, thank you again, dear, and come back any time. And
thank you so much, Maxine, for having me.
Oh, you are more than welcome. My sincere pleasure. And so, dear listeners, we have come to the close of another edition of Move Into the Magic. I hope that you will join me again next week when, once again, I have a fascinating guest for you, such as my guest today, Dr. Michael Salla. And remember,